How's the convention going for you so far?
Well, spectacular. Overwhelming support. Certainly the straw poll is a strong indicator of that, 93, almost 94%. But in a larger sense, really just the support that people are passionate. It's a year and a half from today till the November 2nd election in 2010. And I think just like people here, people all across the state are not satisfied with where the state's headed. They're not satisfied in many ways with where the nation's headed. And so this gives us an opportunity to give a clear message of what we would do to make this state great again.
So why so many people line up behind you?
I think a combination of clearly we have a firm commitment to the grassroots. You know, we're not going to win this election like the governor has in the past with a ton of money from Madison, from the big special interest groups. We're going to win it, you know, from donors at $10, $20, $50 at a time, and from a whole lot of people doing grassroots, not only the old-fashioned way with door-to-door and phone banks, but also from, you know, Twitter and MySpace and LinkedIn and YouTube and all the other things on our website, scottwalker.org. Certainly we're going to make a firm commitment to the grassroots, and I think that's going to make a difference. The other part is I think the message, and that may even be first and foremost the reason. I think people are passionate about the fact that we made an indictment about how this governor is taking us back to the failed policies of the early 1980s when jobs and people left the state in huge values. In fact, so bad at one point, I remember growing up in Delavan near the state line, Jim Thompson, the governor of Illinois, literally put up a billboard that said, when the last business leaves Wisconsin, please turn off the lights. I mean, it was that bad, and that's exactly where we're headed. In contrast, we've got a message that says we don't have to do that anymore. We have a message that says we believe in Wisconsin, we believe in making it great. Traveled the state thousands of miles. I've seen its people, I've seen the employers, I've seen our natural resources, all of which are great. The one thing failing us is our state government.
So what should we expect your campaign to look like over the next year or so?
Well, essentially we're going to have a conversation through a virtual website, if you will, a virtual town hall meeting, I should say, and not only through our website but through YouTube and our electronic town hall meetings and the other things out there. We're going to really try and take it to a completely different level. When I first won for the state assembly years ago as a 25-year-old coming out of the American Red Cross and IBM before that, I won, even though a lot of other people maybe had some more experience at the time, but I won because I knocked down about 14,000 doors and really reached most of the voters in my district in Wauwatosa. In this case, I can't knock on the doors of 5.5 million people in the state of Wisconsin, but I can find new ways to reach out to them through their neighbors, through electronic means, through other forms of communication. We're going to rely on that. That's really the wave of the future. The governor and his allies have already shown when they started running attack ads 3 weeks ago, that they're going to use the old techniques of the past that are beat up your opponent, beat up your opponent, beat up your opponent to the point that people forget about your own record. We're going to talk about our vision for the future and how we want to make Wisconsin great again.
Aside from yourself and the party in general, how is the party looking going forward in the future? They had a rough 2000.
I do. I think the good thing is I think party officials and elected officials in the party have learned from the past. The fact that nationally a guy like Paul Ryan has moved up in prominence to speak out in the budget, I think, is a reflection that people are starting to get it. You know, what brought Paul Ryan, who grew up down the way from me in Janesville, Paul Ryan in the prominence and ultimately what brought him into politics is the same sorts of things that brought me into politics and ultimately public service, and that was we were inspired by Ronald Reagan. You know, a guy who knew who he was, knew where he was going and how he was going to get there. He talked about a clear message 30 years ago when the country was in a malaise. He was talking about limited government, economic opportunity, personal freedoms, and that's something that not only won but was effective. You know, when Ronald Reagan's policies were enacted, with the largest economic boom in American history, 21 million new jobs, 5 million more businesses were created. I think we can do the same thing here in Wisconsin if we have that kind of commitment. And I think the party leaders now more than ever get it that, you know, what they did before was let the voters down. Too many Republicans in Washington and even a few here in Wisconsin let the voters down and didn't act like the fiscal conservatives they ran as. We've weeded out those people. We've made a difference here, and ultimately I think in my case the reason I resonate not only with these delegates but with the people of the state, regardless of whether they're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, is I've got a proven track record. I've made bold promises in arguably one of the toughest places in the state to govern, and we've delivered on them. 7 straight budgets without a property tax levy, balanced our budget, actually had a surplus last year, and if given the chance, I'll do it again and again and again as our governor.
Oh, now you've been talking, I'm sure, to a lot of people here today and over the next day. What is the main thing that people are bringing to you? What are they talking about? What do they want to? What message do they want to give you?
Well, they're pumped up. I mean, they're excited. They've seen what happened in all the times I've been around the state over the last few months since the start of the year. They're excited about that already. So a lot of people came already pumped up and motivated. They're excited about our announcement this past week and the several tours we've taken around the state in the last couple of days since then. And I think after the speech today, they feel the passion's there. They feel the excitement's there. In many ways, they feel the same sense we had in 1986 when the state was facing a very similar downward cycle that Tony Earl and the state Democrats were taking them on. Tommy Thompson came along. He had a vision. He had a focus. He had an optimistic view of this state, and that was infectious, and it got people pumped up. What I've heard from people, thankfully, here is a lot of people saying that echoes the same sorts of themes, that people are pumped up again. They believe in Wisconsin. They believe we can turn things around, and they're ready to go to work and make it happen.
All right, thanks for your time.
Sure, my pleasure.
Scott Walker is going to say a few words and conduct the Pledge of Allegiance. As you know, Scott's a former state representative, and he was elected county executive in 2002, winning on a message of less government and government reform. As county executive, Scott has successfully kept property taxes down while maintaining a good quality of life. As of this week, Scott is the Republican candidate running to unseat Governor Jim Doyle. Please welcome County Executive Scott Walker.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's right. Come on, Senator, we want to get to those hospitality suites. That's right. That's right. Hey. I'm going to have you stand up again in a second, but sit down for a minute. I'm going to start with the right thing, and I'm going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. But before we do, I want to look around this room, and I want every veteran to stand up at this time. Anybody who served in armed forces, active duty, Guard, Reserve. And along with that, I want anybody else who's got a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, a nephew, a niece, anybody in their family who is serving on active duty, the Guard, Reserve right now, to stand on up, and let's appreciate them as well. Now, would everybody else stand up and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now you can be seated. Yeah, two. Steve knows I'm the Eagle Scout, so on my honor, I'll do my best to do my no, wait, sorry. The other day, my den mother was at one of our kickoffs, so that was pretty exciting down in Delavan. I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight, but I particularly want to thank 93.4% of you. No, I'm sorry, that was the straw poll. No, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Because I mentioned with a meeting earlier, the county chairs, you guys are the heart and soul of the Republican Party, not just here at this convention, but of the conservative movement across the state of Wisconsin. You're the ones who put us in office. You're the ones who can take us out of office. And most importantly, you're going to put more of us in office a year and a half from tonight. On behalf of Tonette and I and our two sons, Matt and Alex, we can't thank you enough for what you've done for us in the past, what you're going to do for us and so many others. We appreciate you, and for what you do for this party, but most importantly for what you do for this state. I love you. I love you too, man. I just want to share a couple minutes. You know, last night we heard from Michael Steele, but a week and a half after the election, Michael Steele was not the RNC chairman. As Reince and Bill know, he was at that time still the GOPEC chairman. You know, GOPEC that Pete DuPont started, but Newt Gingrich really put on the map. J.C. Watts took over. But a few years back, Michael Steele, before he took on the challenge as our national committee chairman, was the head of GOPAC. And so he asked me and 2 other speakers to come down that Friday morning, a week and a half after the election. And I was the 3rd speaker up. The Attorney General of Virginia, who's running for governor this year, was first. Then the Secretary of State of Michigan, who's one of a handful of candidates running for governor of that state, came next, and then me. And pretty good speeches. The AG, just like JB, spectacular AG down there in Virginia. I think he's going to be the next governor there. But right after that, the Secretary of State got up, gave a pretty good speech. But at the end, in front of GOPAC, now remember, this is a pretty conservative group, a farm team for legislative and congressional candidates. This person got up and said, you know what? We just got our butts kicked last week. Maybe it's time for us to broaden our tent and change our message. Yeah, it went over like a lead balloon. So I get up and I have to explain. I think, how do I follow that? So first I told people a little bit who I was. You know, I'm a county executive in not just a blue, but a dark blue county. But I won not once, not twice, but 3 times, now 60%. I said I've done 7 straight budgets without raising the property tax levy. We've made these reforms. We've done these other things. Got to the end of the speech, and I looked at this crowd, and the Secretary of State is still seated there. So I didn't want to call her out by name. Bill knows this because she was sitting right in front of him. And I said, you know, there's been a lot of pundits out there in the last week who said, we need to change our message. I told that crowd that morning the same thing I'll tell you here tonight. I fundamentally disagree with that. There is nothing wrong with our message, only our messengers, at least those at the top of the ticket. Now, John McCain is a great American hero, a good war hero, a decent man. But John McCain didn't have a message for us, not just in this room, for the people of this country. Think about it. Last fall when the economy melted down, can anybody tell you, anybody you knew across the state, across this country, that could tell you what John McCain's message was to get this economy going again? He wasn't the right messenger, and he wasn't, and probably in ways wasn't carrying all the same message that we in this room have never given up on. Now, I look at that and I say the optimism on that, even though, you know, you had Barack Obama spent more money than George W. Bush and John Kerry combined. And yet, even in the last few weeks leading up to the election, even though we had a candidate who didn't have a strong message, he still couldn't seal the deal to the very end. That tells me this is a center-right state and a center-right country. We need only to find the right messengers to carry that message. And history shows us that that can work. It's hard to believe. I feel a lot younger than this, but 30 years ago, President Jimmy Carter said this country was in a malaise. Remember? The economy was in the tanks. We had an oil embargo. We had our friend Kevin Hermaning from Wausau was one of those Marines held hostage in Iran. We were in the dumps. Jimmy Carter threw in the towel and said, we're in a malaise. But thank God, Ronald Reagan came along and said, are you kidding me? This is America. And Ronald Reagan had a strong message. He talked about limited government. He talked about economic opportunity. He talked about personal freedom. And he took a message to the American people in November of 1980. He not only won, but something we need to remind people, particularly those in the media, over and over and over again now, as we face similar times, is that Ronald Reagan took that message not just to the electorate, he took it to the Congress. And in the 1980s, through the end of that decade, we had the largest peacetime economic boom in history. 21 million new jobs, 5 million new businesses, because Ronald Reagan was committed to that message. What that tells me for here in Wisconsin, as we face similar times in this state yet here again, is we don't need to change our message. We need to rally behind messengers. Not just in the race for governor. We've got a great messenger when it comes to public safety and law enforcement and J.B. Van Hollen. We got to work our butts off to get him reelected come 2010. We've got a great message when it comes to the state assembly and the state senate. We're not just talking about being anti-Democrat. We've got a vision for hope and opportunity and getting this state working again. We just got to get more friends and more allies in the state assembly, the state senate, and from Congress here in Wisconsin. And the great news about all of that is when we reach out and do all that we can with our time, our talent, and our treasure, not next week, but today. Not next month, but today. Not next convention, but today. when we step out and find the right messengers to carry that message forward, we will win not as Republicans, not as conservatives, but as people who love the great state of Wisconsin, who remember how great it once was, but more importantly, dream big about how great it will be. Let's believe in Wisconsin again. God bless you.
You know what I love about Wisconsin? Some people love living here. But right now, they're just not satisfied with the direction Wisconsin's headed. And neither am I. That's why I just filed my papers to run for governor. I mean, the current leadership in Madison is just not better. Take a look at these headlines. The other day, Harley Davidson announced they're shedding even more jobs. And these 400, they specifically mentioned that in part, it's because of the tax increases the governor signed off on earlier this year. Is it any wonder now that the jobless rate's the highest it's been since '82? You know, the state's 9.4% unemployment rate is actually higher than the national average. Now's the time to get going on this campaign. We want to take Wisconsin back. The next 18 months are going to be a lot like Wisconsin roads in the spring. It's going to be a little bumpy. You might hit a pothole or two along the way. But I hope you're along for the ride. After all, it's time to believe in Wisconsin.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Walker.
Good morning. Good morning. Good to be with you. Senator Kapanke, I want to tell you thank you not only for being a great chair of this convention, but thank you to you and Mike Hips for what you do to represent La Crosse and the Cooley region. You do a spectacular job in Madison, but most of all, thank you for letting me throw out the first pitch at a Loggers game. I love you. It was a strike. It is good to be back in La Crosse with fellow conservative activists like all of you. You are the heart and soul of the Republican Party, and I thank you for all that you do. Today, it is an honor and privilege to stand before you today as an official candidate for governor of the great state of Wisconsin. During the past week, we've seen amazing crowds as we kicked off our campaign in Green Bay, Rothschild, Altoona, and Dane. Then we went home to Wauwatosa, where, as you just saw, we were greeted by 1,000 enthusiastic supporters. On the next day, we started in Delavan, where I grew up, and the small town that shapes the values I carry today. Everywhere we went on our tour, people came out and said they were there because they're concerned about our state's future. I am too. Wisconsin's $5 billion budget deficit is the worst in history and one of the largest in the country. The state unemployment rate is now higher than the national average, and Wisconsin has lost 112,000 private sector jobs in the past year. After 6 years in office, Governor Jim Doyle says he's not responsible for our current problems. I disagree. Our budget problems started long before the economic meltdown. For years, too many politicians in Madison have ignored the looming crisis so they could spend more and more taxpayer dollars. Now, the solution to the soaring budget deficits and record job losses is to call for more government spending, paid for by higher taxes on Wisconsin families and employers. While the people of this state tighten their belts to make it through this recession, Governor Doyle actually calls for more government spending, nearly 10%. And the tax increases he signed into law earlier this year to help pay for the spending has already contributed to the loss of hundreds of good-paying jobs. I know well, 2 weeks ago, Wisconsin's own Harley-Davidson announced that they'll lay off up to another 400 workers. One major reason for these layoffs is the tax increase already approved by the governor earlier this year. And it's not always taxes that cost us jobs here in Wisconsin. Sometimes it's a lack of effort. Recently, Thomas Industries was deciding whether to stay in Sheboygan or move to Louisiana. Governor Doyle couldn't find the time to pitch to company officials directly, and he let the final presentation go to a low-level bureaucrat while he took a trip to Spain. At the same time, Louisiana's governor personally worked with the company, put together an incentive package, and ultimately convinced company officials to move 280 good-paying jobs from Wisconsin down to Louisiana. These job losses are devastating to Sheboygan and for all of us here in Wisconsin. And while families, retirees, and employers are barely able to afford to get by, Governor Doyle actually wants to raise our taxes by nearly $3 billion. This will drive jobs and people out of the state. Now, I remember the last time Wisconsin faced a similar situation. It was the early 1980s. We were in a recession, and the state had a huge budget deficit. Then, as now, the governor and the Democrats in charge believed in balancing the budget with big tax increases. Remember that? It only made things worse. In fact, it got so bad, so many jobs left this state that the governor of Illinois actually put up billboards on our state line that said, "When the last business leaves Wisconsin, please turn off the lights." It was that bad, and sadly, it's even worse today than it was back then. Today, we have a governor who once claimed that everyone in prison belongs there, but now advocates the early release of as many 3,000 convicted criminals into our neighborhoods. A governor who abandons his commitment to protect our children from dangerous sexual predators through GPS tracking. At the same time, he authorizes the use of hidden cameras to track down speeders. We don't share the priorities of an administration that is more concerned about establishing a domestic partner registry for same-sex couples than updating the state sex offender registry to keep our schools and our neighborhoods safe. We have a governor who wants to lift the cap on double-digit property tax increases while he does little to reform our education system. We have a governor who raided more than $1 billion out of the transportation fund and now asks for a new gas tax to help pay for it. We don't share the values of a governor who wants to turn back the clock when Wisconsin was a magnet for welfare and a haven for frivolous lawsuits. We have a governor who wants to expand paid maternity leave for welfare recipients to 6 months, while hard-working Wisconsin families struggle to take 6 weeks off without pay. A governor who wants to gut decade-old welfare or legal reforms that keep Wisconsin from becoming a haven for frivolous and costly lawsuits that cost us jobs. We don't share the values of a governor whose top advisor votes to require a University of Wisconsin clinic to perform late-term abortions. A governor who took over $30,000 in campaign cash from a Madison abortionist and his wife. We have a governor who does not share our values. We've lost faith in a governor who makes higher education unreachable for Wisconsin families as tuition has gone up by more than 70%. A governor who raises those costs while giving tuition breaks to people whose families aren't even in this country legally. We don't understand a governor who makes a mockery out of our electoral process by overlooking the abuses in the system, a governor who voted responsible and reasonable election reforms and requirements to vote not once, not twice, but 3 times. We don't support Governor Jim Doyle because his policies are taking us backwards. Now, that's a powerful indictment, but I'm here to tell you today that history doesn't have to repeat itself. With the right leadership, we can build a better Wisconsin. As I've traveled around the state, I'm happy to say that I've seen our hardworking people, our decent employers, and our outstanding natural resources. I know the people and places of the state, and I know that we can build a better Wisconsin. I believe in Wisconsin. I believe in Wisconsin. I believe in Wisconsin. I believe in a state that takes the education of our children and puts it ahead of the needs of the special interests, and a state where parental involvement in a child's education is celebrated and not litigated. I believe we should expand educational options for like school choice and charter schools and virtual schools, especially in our state's largest city, where these programs can provide a lifeline to some of our most vulnerable children. I want to build a better Wisconsin where students are given affordable options for learning beyond high school. I want to live in a state where our hardworking families can access affordable and quality health care, not through big government bureaucracy, but through market-based solutions like competition, transparency, and tax incentives. I believe in a state where we budget based on need and not on want. Just because a government program has a high-priced lobbyist does not mean it should continue, let alone receive automatic funding increases. That's worth applause. I believe we should strip policy and pork from the state budget. This process should be about funding essential government programs based on a taxpayer's ability to pay. It should not be about horse trading for special interest groups. I believe that there should be no more raiding segregated state funds to pay for other programs. If taxpayer revenue is collected for a specific purpose, it should be used for that purpose and that purpose only. I believe, just as our Attorney General rightly believes, in a state that that keeps convicted criminals behind bars and gives law enforcement and prosecutors the tools they need to keep our neighborhoods straight. I believe in a state where we protect the sanctity of every innocent life and where every life matters. A state that honors the right to keep and bear arms. A state that joins almost every other state in the union in giving us the legal right to carry. And a state that supports our sportsmen and our sportswomen. I believe in a state that supports the legal right to vote and acts to ensure that every vote is cast legally. And I believe in a state that honors the men and women who fought so hard and those who are fighting hard still today to protect that right to vote in a free society. I believe in Wisconsin. Say it with me. I believe in Wisconsin. Say it again. I believe in Wisconsin. It is no longer enough to tinker around the edges of failed public policies that drive jobs, qualified workers, and retirees from our state. I believe in change that will take our state in a new direction. Change that is founded on the principles of limited government, economic opportunity, and personal freedom. These are simple principles. Simple, but not easy. There have been countless times during my tenure as county executive when it might have been easier to abandon these principles in favor of a more politically expedient solution. But I campaigned on a pledge to treat the taxpayers' dollars as if they were my own. I did it before, and if I have the honor of serving as your governor, I will do it again and again and again. Real leadership means sticking to your principles, even when it's not always politically popular with those inside government. That's exactly the kind of leadership this state needs to get our state working again. I believe in the people of Wisconsin. I believe in our can-do attitude and commitment to excellence. And I have witnessed firsthand the generous spirit that makes Wisconsin such a wonderful place to call home. I am running for governor because I believe in a better Wisconsin, and I know that you do too. Please join me, and together we can build a better Wisconsin, a Wisconsin we can believe in again. Thank you, and God bless you.